Please, Miss Eleni.
Loretta Arthur.
Here.
Robin Hanger.
Here.
Dennis Smith. Here. Tony Casada. Here. Michael Meyer.
Here, I'll do the invocation. Rob, will you lead the pledge? Join me in the invocation, please. Lord, we just thank you for our time here tonight. We pray that you will give us wisdom and we will make good judgments for the city of Holly Hill. And all this we pray in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Here we go. Our first item tonight, new term, we need to elect a chairman and a vice chairman. So, do I have any nominations for chairman?
I nominate Dennis.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
You have a second. So, any other nominations
For chairman,
for chairman?
that's your position.
That's my position.
You stepping down?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
That wasn't my intention.
Well, okay, I thought you...
No.
okay.
I'm sorry, Robin. You misunderstood
Yep,
me.
I did. I'll second.
We have to do, it's a new term, so we have to do the new chairman.
All right.
The term,
Sorry.
chairman and vice, that's okay.
All right.
I thought maybe I'd done something
I
wrong.
nominate Mike.
Okay, yeah, I thought you were stepping down, Mike. I'll second that motion.
Thanks. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, all opposed, say no, all right.
Now, we know if you step down, who we want to take your place,
We
okay?
got it. All right. So now, we need a nomination for vice chairman, and that's where Dennis is now.
Dennis. I nominate Dennis.
You nominate Dennis?
Second.
Okay, I have the second motion, nomination and a second. You accept? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say no. All right, sounds like you got it too. There you go. All righty. Everyone have a chance to look at the minutes? Is that yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Do we have any additions, deletions, corrections? Is this not working?
Yes, it is.
Okay, all right.
Do you want me to turn it up so you can hear it better?
Don't mind. So since there are no additions, deletions, or corrections, do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I have a motion and a second. Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say no. It's unanimous. All right. Yep, I think so. Thank you, Lenny. All right. Mr. Simpson will be with us shortly. He was stuck in traffic, and he'll just be a few minutes, but we thought we'd go ahead and get started with this. Mr. Walker, would you like to present the first agenda item?
Yes, Chair, Board. Many of you are familiar with the fact that back on September 27th, the City Commission approved a residential plan unit development that is known as the Vineyards. Rick Magiri is the applicant, and this is for a property that is approximately 14.2 acres. It's located approximately 900 feet west of Center Avenue on the south side of 6th Street. And this evening, the applicant is requesting the preliminary plat approval, which is also known as final engineering approval, for this project, which is going to be 134 lots. This site has a medium-density land use, and the planned development is the zoning, and that permits 13.21 dwelling units per net acre. What they propose on the property are townhomes that will be 2 stories. They'll have a maximum height of 30 feet. The minimum lot size is 1,800 square feet, and the minimum townhome square footage will be 1,060 square feet. The city is the provider of potable water and sanitary sewer. The applicant did submit final engineering plans for the subdivision. These have been reviewed by a licensed engineer. They've been reviewed also by the relevant divisions for the city. They did also provide an environmental report to assess the potential occurrence of flora and fauna that's listed as threatened and endangered. The report showed that there are no listed species that were observed on the project site, and there are also no wetlands on the project site. Additionally, the applicant provided a geotechnical engineering report. They were looking at subsurface exploration, laboratory testing, geotechnical engineering analysis were done on the site as well. And the review also, or I should say a review was also done by St. John's River Water Management District and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and has received permitting by those agencies. So I tell you this just so you know kind of the path, the approvals, and reports that have been submitted in support of the project. The development also was reviewed by the school board because it is a residential development, and they did receive a finding of adequate capacity from the school board in terms of the ability for the school system to be able to serve any children that live at the site. A final plat for the proposed subdivision is currently under review, and the applicant has been notified that lots cannot be sold until such time that the subdivision improvements have been completed, inspected, and approved, unless bonded, and the subdivision has received final plat approval. Final plat approval will not come before this board. Final plat approval, once it is complete, will go to the city commission only for their approval. The city has approved the final engineering plans. All of the relevant divisions have signed off on those plans, and there are no objections to the 134-lot development. This item is being brought before you as a board tonight in accordance with Section 82-216 of the Land Development Regulations. That does have an area where it lists the things that you as a board need to review when it comes to considering this proposed subdivision plan. The items that are there in that section have been listed in your staff report. I won't go through all of them, but that is basically what is on the table this evening for the Vineyard subdivision. Staff will recommend that the City Commission approve the preliminary plat and final engineering plan for the Vineyards subdivision, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Lenny, those items, can you blow them up so we could maybe read them on these, just in case?
You're talking about these 8?
The ones that Brian just spoke of. Usually I print all this out, but there was a 239-page packet this month, so I didn't print all 239. That's why I should have done it. I just didn't get to it. Thank you.
Is that big enough?
Yes, ma'am, that works for me. I didn't memorize them. Are you going to speak tonight, Mr. Newkirk? Well, why don't you come up there in case somebody has some questions. Tell us who you are and where you're from.
Harry Newkirk, Newkirk Engineering, 1230 North US Highway 1, Ormond Beach. I'd like to thank Brian Walker for all the help on the project and your city manager throughout, as we had questions from rezoning to final engineering plans, and everybody in between, public utilities, fire, you name it. So we started with rezoning, and the plan that we used for rezoning, the exact site plan, is what you see here tonight. There was no changes. Sometimes there would be changes, but there wasn't any changes that developed from permitting. And what I mean by that is we have our St. John's River Water Management District permit, where they reviewed the stormwater system, the floodplain, all that stuff, compensating storage, and we got approval by St. John's on the site. We have the water permit from Volusia County Health Department for the water main improvements tying into the city system. We also have sanitary sewer approval from Florida Department of Environmental Protection for the sewer system. So at this time, we have all of the site permits required to build the project. The set of plans followed the exact zoning requirements with the full set of landscape, irrigation, tie-ins for Went to Kavanaugh for fire, to have another access point for emergency services. Could go through this site both directions. That's good interconnectivity. And we're not asking for a single variance. We did everything and went above and beyond on the plans for this project. I look forward to obtaining approval and starting construction of the 134 units.
Earlier today, Mr. Casada called me with a question and just asked me that if he could ask a question, and so.
Harry, is it okay, Mike?
Sure,
Thank you.
go.
Thanks for coming tonight. I'd like to bring up something that's bothered me for a while, not on this subdivision, but numerous subdivisions. When you say the school board has approved and said that our schools are capable of handling the new students that will move into your subdivision. I'm on a SAC committee for the Holly Hill Middle School. And at our last meeting about a month ago, it was right before the first of the year, the teachers and the principal were telling us, this and that. And I said, well, how full are you? He said, we're over full. The school board was coming within the next 30 days to do a walk around, and the school board did their walk around. Don't hold me to these numbers. I talked to the principal, and he said the school board, the principal and the school board have come to the assumption that the school is capable of 950 students, give or take. They're at 1150 today. Might be 1148, but I just rounded off the numbers. So that's just something that's bothered me. And I don't know where to take it, where to go with it, but just something that.
So what we do is with every project, when you have to go through the concurrency stages, we fill out the form, and Volusia County has a direct form, and then Mr. Brian Walker signs it on behalf of the city, and then it goes to the school board. They have a concurrency department that goes over this, and our concurrency said we were in compliance. We didn't need to pay mitigation, and sometimes you pay mitigation. What would that be? That would be you got to pay for they would call it a student station. They run around $13,000-$20,000. On this review by the county school board, they said we were in compliance. We didn't have to pay mitigation.
They would know.
So I don't know how their calculations totally work. It's just something, we go through rezoning and we go with the plans, and they said we're fine on the site.
Thank you.
This location.
Okay. Any more questions for Mr. Newkirk?
What I could add is, two county charter review sessions ago, so probably over 20 years ago, there was an amendment put out that said that to the county charter that there could not be additional development unless there was a determination that adequate schools existed. And that was approved and added into the county charter. I think it was probably over 20 years ago. How adequate schools are defined, there's an interlocal agreement between the school district, the county, and all the cities that, and it's vested solely with the school board or the school system, that they make a determination of adequate. And that also means what is adequate. What is an adequate capacity? And then they take into consideration future rezonings. If they have planned rezonings that they may need to do, they look into those issues. And if I remember correctly, adequate capacity could exceed 100% of the capacity of the school. That's their determination. So we really have no say over it, but the reason we have no say over it is not just because you have the school district, which is a separate entity, but you also have this county charter amendment that says that we cannot proceed with development until the school board reviews residential development and determines that there is adequate capacity. And they determine what adequate capacity is.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Appreciate it. Is there anyone out there that would like to speak to this, either for or against? No? Okay. Well, I would entertain a motion to approve this final engineering plan recommended to the city commission.
I
Yes,
think the gentleman back there is having a little bit hard time to hear, and he may have a question, I don't know.
do you have a question, sir?
Yes, sir.
Well, then come up here and ask it.
Yes, sir. Ross Catalano, Churchill Drive.
Okay?
Excuse me, not familiar with everything, but the gentleman that just was speaking is the property developer?
No, sir, he's the engineer. He's the designer.
All right. Question is that all these surveys that were taken before Hurricane Ian?
Surveys that were taken before Hurricane Ian. Okay, and where are you going with that question?
No, the reason is because there was quite a bit of flooding down off of 3rd Street. That would be, I would imagine, the south end of the gentleman's property.
Well, it's toward the south end. His property actually ends at 4th Street.
The arrow points north?
Yes, sir?
All right, so the southern end would be that solid black line. I'm not quite-
So your concern is flooding?
No,
there.
besides the storm drainage, which flooded that whole area, most of the people who live off of 3rd Street, around the drainage area, all those houses were flooded. Now, if there's concrete down and the storm comes in, where does all that water go?
Right.
That's the first question. Second is that, all right, there's 134 developments. Everybody has a vehicle. 3rd and 6th are only two-lane streets. Same thing with Center. Where is all that traffic going to go?
Okay, those are good questions.
Excuse me, I just,
You have a time limit, sir, and we're approaching it, so if we don't get you some answers, you're not going to...
top part is that 6th Street? That looks like 6th. Was that Center? No, that's,
No.
6th Street is on the left, sir.
Over here.
The left,
Center's around
You see where my mouse is?
the
top
left.
part is Center?
No, top part is other land. If you look to the left, that's 6th Street.
To the left is 6th.
Yep.
So on the other side would be 3rd. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay,
All right, so, I'm not seeing what. Bottom half would be around Dixie? Is that correct, sir?
What? Dixie. You talking about the back streets? Kavanaugh?
Bottom half would be, I'm
right. Okay, well, let's get to your point.
not seeing all this straight. Well, the thing is that besides the drainage and the vehicles,
Yes,
where
all right. Is this-
everything is developing.
Then your time is up, sir. Sit down, and I will answer your question for you.
No.
I will answer
All
every
right.
one of those questions.
There
But-
was something on the screen about sewerage. I also have a backup. So unless the sewerage and the drainage is taken care of, that back end of the southern end of the property is all going to get flooded again.
Yes, sir. Ring the bell, please.
Now,
I didn't hear it.
News Journal on one side cut off all those trees which absorbed the water. There's no place for the water to go.
All right.
They put in an overflow.
Your time is up. You may sit down. I will answer every question that you have.
All right, thank you.
Sit down. And make sure, and if you can't hear me, let me know. I do the same thing. I have bionic ears myself.
Well, with age, gets you gentlemen, excuse me, women also, but you gentlemen understand, it goes as well as receding.
They say that's the second thing that
And
goes.
eyesight. Thank you.
All right. The answers to all your questions are that fellow sitting right in front of you. The water, the sewer, the drainage, the flooding, all of those things, the traffic, that's all what he gets paid lots of money to figure out, to make sure that it will all work. Then once he does his plan, then we have a whole system that looks at every bit of it to make sure that what he has done and said is going to be correct. That's what we have to have trust in all of that, because, no, you're sitting down. You sit down. You're done. You're done. Okay. And we have to have trust in what Mr. Newkirk has told us, what the staff has told us, what the reviewers have told us is all correct. And that's how we make our judgments. So everybody in Holly Hill knows there's flooding down there around 4th Street and 3rd Street Center. Everybody knows that. We all are aware of that. We all live here. Every one of us lives here and has lived here for a long time. Understand? For a long time. So it is our concern too, that when Mr. Newkirk comes, who is a well-thought-of engineer, and tells us that his plan is going to work, all these people have reviewed it and says it will work, it will not make anything worse, it will only make it better. We got to take them at their word.
Be better.
Right. And that's what we're working towards. So that's the answer to your question.
As long as it gets better and not worse.
That's the plan.
Because you could kayak from 3rd Street, as I said, all the way down to the back end of the Vineyard and News Journal.
Yes, sir.
Without any obstruction.
30 years ago, before that retention pond was built out there, at the end of 4th Street.
Drainage ditch.
Right.
Overflows from News Journal.
Right.
And that drainage ditch hasn't really been dredged
Okay.
in quite a while.
All right. This horse is dead. We're not hitting it anymore. We're done. We're going to move on.
From
All right.
Center to Nova.
Yes, sir. Please stop.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
You did good.
Excuse me for shouting over.
All right. I was in the middle of making a motion. Now, or asking for a motion. A motion to be made.
I'll make a motion that we accept it the way the staff has it written out and approved.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion?
I just have a quick question, because we already approved
This is
this.
the time. The first one
Yeah, the
Different-
first approval was zoning.
was zoning.
And so that it didn't have probably the level of detail, although there was some preliminary analysis done. So when they come back through for site plan, they get into more detail analysis.
Okay, because it looks the same, that's why I was
Yes.
asking.
It was supposed to.
Okay, thank you.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing that it did. Okay. Any more? All right. All right. Will you call the question, please, Miss Eleni?
Robin Hanger,
Yes.
Tony Casada.
Yes.
Loretta Arthur,
Yes,
Dennis Smith. Yes. Mike Meyer.
Yes. Okay, motion's approved. It'll go to the commission when? When will it go to the commission?
This will go to the commission at the first meeting in February.
All right. Thank you.
Some people are rushing out to see the college football championship.
Okay. All right, number two, please.
Chair, let me just check one thing for you. I'm thinking. Actually, it will go the 24th.
24th of January?
Yes, the 24th of January, and I will let the applicant
All right.
know that. The 24th of January.
Oh. Okey-doke. All right, are you ready to move on to number 2 then, Mr. Walker?
Yes, Chair.
All right, whenever you're ready.
On January 11th of last year, MGN Contracting, they applied on behalf of Carol Woodruff, and she is a property owner at 1235 Powers Avenue. And the contractor applied to build a 1,872 square foot detached garage with an apartment. The city reviewed the application and denied approving it. I'll give you some background as to why the city denied approval. A garage is an accessory structure on a property, and it has a size limitation. The size limitation per section 114-742-2C1 of the Land Development Regulations, it states that a detached garage may not exceed 50% of the total square footage of the principal structure. So per the survey that was provided by Ms. Woodruff, her home is 2,023 square feet. Therefore, a detached garage structure can't be more than 1,011.5 square feet. Now, there are times that when you have the garage, an applicant would like to put an apartment in it. And so they build a detached garage and apply to have an apartment. And this is the case with Ms. Woodruff. And so this particular structure is called a garage apartment. And it's defined in section 114-746 as an accessory building containing a storage area for one or more motor vehicles and one dwelling unit. Said dwelling unit shall not have more than 800 square feet of living space. Now, section 114-742-2B further states that a garage apartments are in association with a garage and that the apartment must be on the second floor of the garage. So really, a garage apartment is basically a detached garage with an apartment upstairs. The detached garage structure, based on code, cannot exceed 50% of the total square footage of the principal structure. And if you put an apartment inside of it, then the apartment portion can't be more than 800 square feet of living space. However, the total square footage of the detached garage structure can exceed 50% of the total square footage of the principal structure. But the overall square footage and how that overall square footage is divided up between the garage and the apartment within the 1,011.5 square feet of the garage structure is up to the applicant. It's just that in no case can the apartment within the garage structure exceed 800 square feet. So based on that, it was staff's conclusion that Ms. Woodruff's detached garage with an apartment in it cannot exceed an overall square footage of 1,011.5 square feet. Well, Ms. Woodruff is proposing a 1,874 square foot detached garage, which is well above the 50% of the size of the principal structure. And that's why staff did not approve the permit request. So that brings us now to the appeal. Mr. Edward Quillen, who's here this evening, he is Ms. Woodruff's husband. She has given approval for him to represent her. And he has filed an appeal of staff's decision to deny the permit request. The appeal is to the Board of Planning and Appeals, and that is in accordance with Section 82-219. After hearing the arguments in this case, the BOPA is requested to make one of the following motions. One, either to agree with staff, the motion to agree with staff's interpretation of Code Section 114-742-2C1 and Section 114-746 and Section 114-742-2B as presented, Such interpretation as applied to this case being that the overall square footage of the detached garage structure, including an apartment, cannot exceed 1,011.5 square feet, which is 50% of the overall square footage of the principal structure on the lot, and that the apartment within said structure cannot exceed 800 square feet, and support staff's decision to deny approval of the applicant's permit request as submitted, or to agree with the applicant. Motion to agree with the applicant's interpretation of the city's land development regulations as presented with regard to the size permitted for a garage apartment and how such size is calculated, and recommend that the city approve the applicant's permit request for a detached garage containing an apartment, such overall structure being 1,872 square feet. So staff requests that Mr. Quillen be able to present his side, his argument, and then staff would like the ability to either question Mr. Quillen or to rebut the arguments that he presents. And I do have the chief building official here, who is licensed by the state to interpret the Florida building code, which you will see has a bearing on this as well. So if it pleases the chair, at this point, staff does not have anything further to say and is ready to hear Mr. Quillen's argument, unless you have questions.
Quillen, you're up. Yes,
Am I
ma'am.
putting a timer on this?
Excuse me?
Am I
no.
putting a
No,
timer?
no.
Okay.
Chairman, I can either.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna
I have
ask.
some guidance
Thank you.
for y'all, and I can do it at the end, after the presentation of everything, or I can do it now.
Yeah.
Whatever you
Do it
prefer.
right now, please.
Okay. Well, first, this is pretty unique. I was trying to think if we've ever actually had an appeal to, because your title is Board of Planning and Appeals, and usually you're doing planning things. This is maybe the very first time that you are hearing an appeal of the decision.
This board, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think in the 30 years I've been representing, I can't think of an appeal before. If there has, it's been a long time ago and very rarely. So the question is, I did some research trying to say, how do the courts look at an agency? When an agency makes an interpretation, which is what we're talking about, staff, the city has made an interpretation of its rules, and now that interpretation is being brought to you on appeal. So how do courts normally look at that? And I'll just read you some things that the courts have said, that when interpreting or reviewing the interpretation by an agency. And it says, generally, a reviewing court, which really you're more or less sitting as, should defer to the interpretation given a statute or ordinance by the agency responsible for its administration. City of Holly Hill, specifically through staff, is responsible for interpreting and enforcing the ordinance in question. But that deference is not absolute, and when the agency's construction of the statute amounts to an unreasonable interpretation or clearly erroneous, it cannot stand. So when you look at it, my guidance would be, unless the staff's interpretation in the majority of y'all's opinion is clearly erroneous or an unreasonable interpretation, then deference should be given to staff's interpretation. And one other thing I saw that I thought would be helpful is that in statutory construction, which is what we're talking about, a literal interpretation need not be given the language used when to do so would lead to an unreasonable conclusion or defeat legislative intent or result in a manifest incongruity. So what that basically says is you read it, but if literally if you read it, it, in your opinion, would defeat the purpose and intent of this regulation, you don't have to take the literal interpretation if you think the intent is something different. So those are just some guiding things I've read in case law that I think would help guide you in the deference. Because one of the questions is, who has the burden of proof here? That'd be one question. I mean, like when we have the last application, the applicant had the burden of proving that they met all the requirements for y'all to make the decision. In this case, the burden of proof is on the appellant, the person who is challenging city staff's interpretation. City staff made an interpretation, and I believe it comes to you with a kind of a preference or a deference, if you will, of be incorrect. They got to prove it's incorrect. And this body should give deference to staff's interpretation unless you find it is an unreasonable or clearly erroneous. Those are the standards I think you should apply. Okay?
Okay, thank you. All right, with that being said, Mr. Cullen, I believe you can take the stand, take the podium.
I heard something new that hadn't been mentioned
Well,
before.
please come right up here, tell us your name. Where are you from? You were
Hi there.
introduced, but for the
My
record.
name is Edward Quillen. I currently reside in Houston, Texas. I'm still working part-time for my company. I'm planning to retire fully and move here to Holly Hill. Okay.
But for now, you're from Houston,
My wife,
Texas.
Carol Woodruff, is staying here all the time now. We used to travel back and forth, but she's big into landscaping, and she can't let that stuff go, because weeds will take over. All right.
And I need to say something. That is my survey that is in this packet, by the way, signed by me, okay? So just so everyone knows. All right, please continue.
Okay. I heard, hi, Brian.
Good to see you, Ed.
I heard Brian mention something about Florida Building Code, that Ricky Lee might offer some topic on that. I hadn't heard that before, and I don't see how it applies. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about this. Do I have a time limit?
No, sir.
I don't want to take your time unnecessarily. I submitted what would have been a PowerPoint presentation as the documentation with the appeals. Did everyone get a chance to read that?
You did.
Of course.
Were there any particular questions on that? Okay. Let me explain how I got where I got. Like I say, I've been living and working in Houston and planning this garage apartment for how many years, Brian?
Close to 2.5, 3, somewhere around there.
And my approach was to read and study and reread the city code. Because to me, as an engineer, I'm used to reading specifications and technical documents that tell me what the requirements are. And if they're not in the document, they don't exist. And I heard this term legislative intent, which seems to say, well, the code doesn't really say this, but the legislative intent was something else. I don't think that's right. So let me tell you, the thing that Brian has stated in this objection documentation that he's offering for consideration is based on the total size of the garage apartment. Now, this is something that I don't think the code says. I think there are words, there's a couple of phrases that Brian has pointed out to me, and he's kind of tied them together to say that the total size of the structure is limited to 50% of the primary structure, but it doesn't say that. It's kind of like code. You read this and you don't get it. In fact, Mike, when you did the survey, you put these numbers on the survey sheet, and it didn't jump out to you like I was coloring outside the lines. Dennis said this may not have come
Don't
up.
put words in
before.
my mouth, sir.
Pardon?
Do not put words in my mouth, and I won't put any in yours.
Well, you stamped it.
That's exactly right.
You should be aware of the numbers in it. I know it's not your job to comment on that, but if it was so far outside the lines, I would have thought you'd have commented. I think that's how obscure this particular interpretation or this particular statement in the code is, that it doesn't say that. My approach was I want to design the biggest garage that I can get because I've got 2 antique cars and I like to have some more workspace than I've got. And my thought was the best way to do this now to make a garage apartment is to simply extend the walls upward. So I looked at an interpretation that would support that. I don't find anything in there that limits the total structure. I find limits on the detached garage portion. There's a whole section of the code on detached garage. Now, there's another section on accessory apartment. Garage apartment, accessory apartment. To me, it looks like there are 2 separate limits that you can stack one on top of the other. that there isn't a total size limit. And I would ask you to bear with me or give me leeway and approve my project. And if the city wants to enforce these interpretations, I would be happy to provide a revised set of Division 4 that will clear these issues up. Because to me, they're not clear. I guess that's the bottom line, gents. I appreciate you hearing me, and I know if it's something that hasn't come up before, you're going to have to scratch your heads about it. I mean, I've been on a board of community association board of directors before, and I know how we had to handle some thorny issues. But I would like to close with this. I wish you all a happy new year. I want to congratulate the city on a couple of things that I've seen. The pickleball court is a fantastic idea. People love it. I think it makes Holly Hill a sort of a center of recreational activity, which is good. The city was Johnny on the spot cleaning up the storm damage compared to Daytona Beach and Ormond. And I thought that was excellent. So there's kudos. And I leave this for your consideration. Thanks for hearing me.
Okay, thank you. Well, is there a discussion?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sir? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. To the audience, I forgot that. Anyone in the audience want to speak about this? No.
Is there anything on Florida Building Code that?
Excuse me?
Brian mentioned that.
Well,
I think that's for
let's
questions.
let the
right?
board have their discussion
We're gonna
and
have some discussion.
questions.
We were going to have some discussion. All right, you were first.
You want me to provide some thoughts just when I look at it, and I talked to Brian ahead of time. The code sets out two types of accessory apartments in residential areas.
Correct.
There's an accessory structure. You can have an accessory apartment, which is one thing, or you can have a garage apartment. The accessory apartment is limited to the lesser of 800 square feet or half the size of the principal structure. When you go to a garage apartment, it says the garage apartment has to be on top of the garage.
Right.
And the detached garage, there's a section that says that it cannot exceed, the detached garage cannot exceed 50% of the principal structure. And then your garage apartment has to be within the garage on the second floor, and it also has a cap of cannot exceeding 800 square feet. So the accessory structure in the garage apartment, accessory living unit and the accessory structure, I guess, have the same cap on square footage.
Right.
Where I think the interpretation issue comes in is, do you look at the garage, detached garage 50% cap of the principal structure? Does it only apply to the garage, or do you include the garage apartment within that? Because if you have an accessory structure, I just want to make sure I'm using the right term here. There's an accessory apartment, then a garage apartment. If you have an accessory apartment, it can only be 800 square feet. If you can have a garage that's half the size of the principal structure, plus add another 800 square feet to it, that is a significantly larger detached structure than what we have over an accessory apartment. So you end up with two totally different size structures here, whereas we are at least saying the garage apartment can exceed. It seems to me when I read it, there's constantly a reference to you cannot exceed 50% of the size of the principal structure. That shows up quite a bit. So when I reference what was the intent, it seems to me one of the intents was, you're not going bigger than 50% of the structure, of the principal structure. That seems to be the intent. And if we separate out and we say the garage apartment, even though it has to be part of the garage, we're going to count the square footage separately, you end up with a structure that is bigger than 50% of the principal structure. So that's when I refer to that one part where, what was the intent of this? Right. I think the intent is, I see two intents. The living space cannot exceed 800 square feet, and the overall structure cannot exceed half the size of the principal structure. Those are the two constant themes I see through here. Now, granted, say it could have been spelled out clearer that you have to include the garage apartment within the scope of the size of the garage, but can I say that it is an unreasonable or clearly erroneous interpretation to say that you include the garage apartment within the size of the garage, which has the overall size limit of half the size of the principal structure, which seems to be one of the guiding principles of all the structures in here. Because, they say 800 feet, the lesser of 800 feet or half the size of the principal structure. So you can't get bigger than half the size of the principal structure unless you do an interpretation that says you calculate the square footage differently. And then you could actually end up with a structure that's equal to the size.
Or greater than.
Or greater than the size of the principal structure. So now I do know in conversations, Mike and Brian and I have gone back and forth on it. And but I think Brian is going to go through this code, review it, clean it up. If there is desire to have larger or different verbiage, that would be a time for this body to make a recommendation to the city commission. But that's my interpretation of what I read.
Robin, I'm going to step ahead of you because of something that Scott has said. Scott, you continually made reference to size of the building, and every time you did it, you did something like this with your hands, speaking about size of the building. Suppose Mr. Quillen, for instance, decided he was going to build his garage, but he wanted to put a motorhome in it. So he decided to put it to our height limit. I can't remember whether it's 30 or 35 feet here, right? So now, 30. So now we've got 1,000 square foot building in footprint, and we've got, it's 30 feet tall. So how big is that structure in square footage?
Well, when you talk about square footage, I could have a large entrance into a house, be a single floor house. And what I thought of is living space. Because if you have a 2-story house, you could have a 1-story house or a 1-floor house with very high ceilings.
Right.
That has only the square footage on the ground floor. But as soon as I put living space on the second floor, that living space on the second floor gets added to the square footage of my house. And we don't have a floor, it says square footage, not, there's another limitation of impervious surface.
Correct.
There's a limitation, you can't
Absolutely.
see that. But when you start saying square footage, that's going to include the second floor with living space in it.
No, I completely disagree.
And so I think there's a term, and I'm trying to think of what the term is if you were going to do the footprint.
Footprint,
If the
exactly. Footprint is
if
what.
it said
right.
footprint, then I think I would agree with you, because it doesn't matter about volume. But when it says
Right.
square footage and you put a second floor living on there, I just think about my house. Somebody could have the same footprint house as me and only have a single floor,
Right.
and they would have a certain square footage.
Right.
But because I have a second floor with more square footage on it, I have a bigger square footage house than them.
And I think that's where the floor area comes in versus square footage. But my problem is in here. The thing that makes me think it's separate is, one is there's an accessory apartment and there's a garage apartment, and they are treated differently. Two items. Then you read 114.742B, and it says garage apartments are in association with a garage. So that, again, that strikes me that we were talking about two different things. And I think that, and as a surveyor, And I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't care whether Mr. Quillen gets this or not. I want to be fair. I want to work out for everyone. But I think that this was written originally for about that box that you kept making with your hands, and pervious versus impervious, whether the water is getting to the ground. And I think that if you had a 1,000-foot garage and you put a second floor in there and made an apartment out of it, that it shouldn't count against that, because we haven't increased we increased the floor area,
And
right?
like I
But
said,
this
I think
says.
the word, if it said footprint, then I think
Yeah,
that would be better
right,
language to
right.
use.
I agree. I think it could be better stated. So I guess where I'm going to this is, I think there's ambiguity here, and it's ambiguity that we ought to consider. Can go one way or the other, same thing. You can look at it from two sides.
Well, remember what my guidance initially was, that the agency, the city
Right,
that's charged with it,
right.
gets deference on their interpretation unless it's clearly unreasonable or clearly erroneous.
Right. In full disclosure, I talked with Missy Phillips today in Daytona Beach, and they interpreted it exactly the same way that Brian is interpreting it in
And their
Daytona
their
Beach.
regulation may be worded different.
Right,
Each jurisdiction is
right.
different. And Brian and I talked about the footprint thing, and maybe that's a better way if you all want to rewrite this to address footprint instead of square footage. It's my understanding our language came from Ormond's.
And I was going to talk to Becky, and I just never got a
Yeah,
chance.
and, but it's just, we're kind of debating two things here. One is, what does this say, and what do we think would be a reasonable regulation?
Right.
And so I'm focused on what this says.
And I'm still focused on this.
Yeah, and I think in association with, but it has to be within, it has to be on top of the garage apartment. So it seems to me, because we talk about square footage, the garage includes the garage apartment, and I was viewing it from my house's perspective. So,
It also says that the garage apartment has to have a garage under it. Says it has to be a place to store one or
yeah,
more
the
vehicles.
garage apartment has to be on the second floor.
Has to be on the garage.
Yeah, and Brian and I questioned why. I asked him why. Why would we require that? Why couldn't you have an apartment adjacent to a garage all on the first floor?
Right, and it'd be a garage apartment.
So we
Walk
talked
through
about
the
that.
garage, get to the apartment.
But
I agree.
it's not worded that way. It's
Right.
worded that the garage apartment has to be on the second floor.
I'm done with my points, board. If whoever else who is next, Robin, please.
Well, I have a couple questions. I want to first start with, Brian, would any of this change if it was attached by a breezeway or the roofs were attached?
If, once you attach them, then it's no longer considered an accessory structure. So that is one solution that he has. But the attachment can't be something that is done.
No.
It's got to be a true attachment.
An engineered attachment. That
Correct.
is an engineered part of the structure.
Right.
Could it be
Okay.
a covered walkway, or would it have to be AC'd?
I believe we've done
I
covered
believe it's
walkways
covered.
where the
And
roofs
if the
are
roofs-
incorporated.
If the roofs are connected, I bring this up because it's kind of unique. I'm basically doing the same thing. I've started with the house, I have it done, and I'm going to build a garage, but I am going to attach it because of insurance here in Florida.
But he can't have a kitchen in it. That
Correct.
is what,
That,
part of his objection to connecting them.
correct, I'm getting to that. So the answer for a solution is to attach it, and now it's completely out of all of this. But I've read this up one side and down the other. To me, it's very, very clear that said dwelling unit shall not have more than 800 square feet of living space. So it can't be more than 50% size. I mean, to me, this is very, very clear. I understand what you're saying about going up, only because I did an RV garage attached to my house, and I had to go up. But unless we are voting that Brian is going to rewrite this to to add in the wording that it has to be part of the, the way you said it had to be part of it and all. To me, it says it right there. It just can't be more than 800 square feet. And I've not liked this because I wanted to build a garage off. Instead, I ended up having to build a $500,000 house. I really just wanted to build a garage. I mean, this has been very, very clear to me for a couple of years in the process of building mine. It can't be more than 50%, and it can't have more than 800 square foot of living space in it, or you make it attached. It's simple.
But then you can't have a kitchen. You
Can't have a
make it an
kitchen.
apartment.
I understand.
So it's not an apartment.
If you attach it, but you can't have a kitchen in it. Granted, I understand that.
It's not an apartment. Yeah.
Well, it is it is an apartment, but, I mean, then the answer is connect the two buildings with a kitchen. And that's the connection there. You've just added to your house. I mean, I understand
All right.
exactly
Yeah,
where
but
he's
that's
coming.
not, but that's not, our question
Yeah,
is,
I understand.
are we
So,
supporting, are we going
I-
to support
I
Brian's position? Or are we
I
gonna
support
Mr.
Brian's
Lawrence?
position in the way this is wrote.
Okay. Next speaker. Go ahead.
Okay, so I struggle with math. Personally, a lot of homes in Holly Hill are probably around 1,200 square feet. You take 50% of that, that's 600, that's an average two-car garage, and then you have an apartment above it with 800 square feet. It doesn't make sense. It makes sense if it's not a garage apartment, but if it's a garage apartment, it has to be above it, then it makes sense that it has to be less than 800 square feet. But an average car garage is 600 square feet. So how are you going to put an apartment and a garage in that square footage on an average house in Holly Hill? I can't imagine, I can't imagine that. So for me, it's just a matter of math. And then, of course, the interpretation, it feels to me that the accessory apartment is one thing, and then the garage apartment is something else. And being that it's above it, if you're building a 600 square foot garage, why wouldn't you match that square footage and go above it? So that's my interpretation. I'd certainly like to see, if you're building a beautiful garage for your property, I'd love to see a second-story apartment for family, or even parties, personally. Anyway, but I didn't read anything in here where it said inside or within, or, when I read this, I completely felt like the intention was not to have it more than 50% of the house, but the apartment could be up to 800. Or if it didn't have a garage, then the maximum should be 800 square feet. That's how I interpreted it. So I'd love to support and see this.
Mr. Casado, you have some thoughts?
Good.
Mr. Smith? All right. This is an odd way to call this question, because we have
We
to...
need a motion.
Well, all right. Do I have a motion? I'm looking for a motion.
I'd make a motion to go with what staff has I understand what you're saying. So with a plan that we clarify it a little better, I agree. I think that you should be able to do that, but to me, it's clear that you can't at this time.
All right.
So I
Well,
would
that's
make a
not part
motion.
of your motion.
Yeah.
Your motion is, I'm sorry.
I would make a motion to agree with staff at this time.
Okay, do I have a second for that? So I have a motion and a second. Is there more discussion? All right.
Can we make a recommendation to change it?
Yeah.
I'd like to make a
Can we
recommendation
make
to
a
change it,
recommendation to
because I
change
think
it?
it's,
We have to amend the motion right this moment.
Okay.
Here's what happened. We just had a motion and a second, right? I offered discussion, nobody discussed. I said, call the question, and then y'all started talking. Too late. Okay? Call the question, please.
Robin Hanger,
Yes.
Dennis Smith. Yes. Loretta Arthur,
no.
Tony Casada,
No.
Mike Meyer.
No. So that motion fails.
Okay.
All right?
So, I'd like to make another motion then. I'd make a motion that we,
Okay, go ahead.
can I?
I wasn't laughing, he was.
I'm just laughing, I'm sorry.
I make a motion that we review and possibly amend
Can we do that, Scott? Can we change?
Can we
the
do that?
Nature of
I mean,
the,
You can direct, I mean, you don't have to vote up or down the,
okay.
interpretation. You can just say, direct staff to come back with a revised amendment. You may want to put some specifics as to what you would like to see, so Brian
Okay.
has the opportunity to, some guidance on it.
Yeah. So what, because, may I say something before you
Yeah,
make your motion?
yes.
So what we would like to see is that there's clarity. Is it really that a 600 square foot garage can't have a 600 square foot apartment on top of it because it's too
It's
too
a ma-
greater than the 1,200 square foot
You
or
can-
1,100
But-
square foot house?
Yeah.
But I-
Can you do it? That's the question, right? And was that really the intention all those years ago with Doug Gutierrez? And I was here and I just don't remember that. I don't remember it. So
But
anyway.
what we don't want, and so I think it's got to be looked at more, we don't want someone to have a house, 2,000 square feet over here, they build a 1,000 square foot garage, and they put a 1,000 square foot apartment up top, and now that is a rental house for them.
No, but they can't be
It's
done.
not a-
All those rules
can't
are
be
in
a
there.
single
All
family.
of those rules are in there. You cannot do that. It's got to be a family member. It's highly restricted. That's another reason that I have a hard time believing that it was the way that it's being interpreted. Not that I'm saying that they're not denigrating your interpretation, your intellect of your interpretation. I'm just saying that it just doesn't seem right to me. And and like I said, Scott, every time you made the shape, right? You showed me the size. You kept saying size with the shape, right? Instead of size with the
Yeah, but,
volume.
we don't regulate volume and we don't regulate footprint.
There you,
We regulate square footage.
we do regulate footprint because it's got to fit inside the setbacks.
Well, that and can't exceed impervious surface, but we don't
Right,
say
right.
that the footprint can't exceed 50% of the side, the
The footprint
footprint.
would be the whole thing.
The footprint would be on the ground. And
The
when I think
footprint's
of
on the
footprint,
ground,
I'm thinking of the ground, and if you were allowed to go, the square footage doesn't matter. We have a footprint and we have a height limitation. What the square footage is in there is up to you, to be, but that's not how it's worded.
Yeah.
It's worded as square footage.
Right.
And so when I think of square footage, I go back, when I think of a house, you can have the same size footprint in a house that has 1,500 square feet and a two-story house that's 3,000 square feet. It's still 1,500 and 3,000 square feet, and we've regulated square foot. Now,
But how can you
1,500
fit, how can you fit an
3,000?
apartment, how can you fit an apartment if you have a two-car garage that's 600 square feet? And you're saying you can have a garage apartment up to 800, you have a two-car garage that's 600 square
but it's
feet.
but it's the lesser of,
it's the
up to
lesser of.
800,
Lesser of.
or 50% of the square footage of the house. So that puts you at the 200. You can't put 800 because now you only have 200 square feet less.
You can't
Well, it's
over that
either
other 200.
50% or 800, so it's up to, so you're saying that
It's
if the
the
car
lesser.
garage was 600 square feet, you could have a 200
square
square
foot
foot apartment? That's how you're
Right.
reading that.
If you have a 1,600 square foot home, you can have 800 square feet of an accessory structure. So the way I interpreted it, the way Brian interpreted it, is that you just take half the size of your principal structure, and that's the size of your accessory structure.
That's the
How many-
floor area of your accessory structure. It isn't the square footage. A square footage is this, right? So you're gonna take this one, this square footage, and you're gonna take this square footage and add them together. Those are, right.
And that's where, and it says square footage. It doesn't say, footprint or building footprint or anything
There's
like
one
that.
there's one of this, one of these codes that says total square footage, but it only says it once that I recall. Total square footage.
But we're
So if you
also
say
giving-
total square footage, then that makes me start thinking more layers, right?
But you're also regulating volume by our height restriction.
Yeah, we definitely.
And none of that's in here.
Right, so if you have, due to our setbacks, so what we're allowing you to do is, with square footage, I'm just using random numbers, the garage can only be 10 by 10, so that's 100 square feet. We can go up and make it taller and put that second floor on, which will give you another 10 by 10, will give you 200 square foot total.
Right.
So that's how you're regulating and can come up with possibly a two-story building that'll still meet that square footage.
I think
Got a
one
question?
question would be,
Or three-story.
Wait.
you know, when I, like I said, when I go back, when I read through the regulations of accessory structures, it seems to me the overall intent is we don't want an accessory structure any bigger than half the size of the principal structure. That seems to be what, an overriding theme in this regulation. That may not be what y'all may want to envision something different. You may be fine with a accessory structure in equal size. But, so once we say, okay, it's half the size, then the next question is, okay, how do we measure that? You know, we're talking square footage over here on the print. Now, if their house was 2-story, their square footage would go up. But if we're going to do footprint, then I think, you know, arguably you would be the same. So a 2-story house is going to be based on footprint, not square footage. So you may have a 1,500 footprint house, even though you have a 3,000 square footage house because it's 2 stories. But if we're going to do footprint, are we going to do footprint on both? So now over here, you have a 750 square foot footprint that you can have as an accessory structure.
That seems to me to be the better intent. That seems to be,
And
that seems
what we did is,
absolutely
well,
correct.
And that's
That
right,
seems
we did square
absolutely correct to
footage,
me.
and I don't know, his is 1 story, so I assume the square footage and the footprint would be the same. But, you know, it would arguably penalize 2-story houses, because you're doing footprint. So
Well, we're penalizing the heck out of the garage apartment as it stands. We are, because you put, as just with Loretta's example, 600 square foot, that's a 2-car garage essentially, right? So now,
Well, but you don't have to have a 2-car garage.
what if you want a 2-car garage?
Of course you do. Of course you do.
Well, I'm saying,
Why wouldn't you?
We're saying a 2-car garage, but when you say we're capping the square footage at half the size of the square footage of the principal structure, you have that much square footage to deal with. How do you
Right.
want to move it around? You can have less in the garage and more in the apartment, or more in the apartment and less in the garage.
Right,
Or we increase the size of the accessory structure.
right.
Chair, I have a question for Scott.
Go.
So, is there a precedent set because there's so many homes in Holly Hill already that have garage apartments? I mean, there's, you know,
Well,
an
and Brian
unlimited
can address
number.
that as to how has the city interpreted and applied. I think
Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Hanger's referenced that, how it's been applied to him. So there, you do have a history of how the city has interpreted it in the past. And obviously, just thinking as a lawyer, I would rather change the code to if you want a different interpretation, then all of a sudden
Then change the
switching around an
there's some-
interpretation of the same
That's a good
code
point, too.
that we've applied differently to other people.
Yeah, I can, this is the way it's been interpreted since it was written back in 2007. This is the way that it's been interpreted in other jurisdictions where I've worked. Seminole County government, the accessory structure, the entire structure overall could not be more than 50% the size of the principal. They didn't want these accessory structures being more than half the size of the main home. So that has been the way that it's been interpreted here for 18, 17 years. And just the typical two-car garage is 400 square feet. That's the standard detail for a 2-car garage. It's not 6.
How many square
So 400.
Okay.
400. So if you have a 2,000 square foot home and you have a 1,000 square foot accessory structure, you can have 500 on the first floor, 500 on the second floor. 500 square foot apartment, it's designed to be a small efficiency type
Right.
apartment. I'm from New York City. That would be a mansion in New York City, 500 square feet. It's more than enough to meet the intent of, remember, this is for a family member.
Right,
This is just for a family member to be there.
Right.
They still have access probably to the main home. So, the interpretation has been square footage. And one thing, Chair, you mentioned that it only had square footage once, but it's in every section.
no, I said total.
Right, total. That's in every section. Total square footage.
I don't remember.
In Section B, Section C, total square footage.
I see my pink didn't get on the total, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just
So.
did in square footage.
Yeah, so, and part of the reason too, when you look at the interpretation of why it was that way is, when it talks about a garage apartment, it says that it's an accessory building containing the storage area for the motor vehicles and one dwelling unit. That's the unit. It's a garage apartment. It includes the garage. It includes the car area. They're not separate. The definition is very clear. So this is going
That
to,
was in 7814, is that where you read that?
that's in 114-746.
746.
And it gives the definition. And in the definition, it links them together. A garage apartment is an accessory building containing a storage area for one or more motor vehicles and one dwelling unit.
Okay, that does say that. You're right.
They're together.
Yeah.
So you can't get around the definition and say that they're apart. It's linked them together. So,
But I
You go up top
interpreted
and they're apart. Okay, I agree. I would like you to make a motion to accept the staff's recommendation, with staff's interpretation, with a recommendation that staff clear this up.
That's what I was trying to do.
All right?
Yeah.
Make that motion?
Yes,
Can I-
I would like to make a motion that we accept the way this is.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to get, before the motion got in, I wanted to get my,
Go ahead, make your motion.
I would like to make a motion that we accept the way this is written now. but-
The interpretation.
But we clarify it.
But we recommend.
We recommend Brian to clarify it and clean it up.
Do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, now we'll have some discussion.
well, I'm curious why we would limit, okay, I get the 50% because we want the structure to be smaller, but going up above it and building an ancillary apartment, why would we want to limit, this is going to increase taxes for our city. It's going to create a more dynamic presence of homesteading in our area. Why would we resist allowing that, I guess is what.
That's a good question, Loretta.
this was written in 2007. I don't know what the thinking was at that time. I can tell you that this is what most jurisdictions are doing. Now, if you as a board would like this to be reconsidered and to allow larger, I can certainly work on that and bring it back, see what the appetite is in terms of the commission, in terms of doing that. But I can't go and address the old reasoning.
Right.
I can just look at what's in front of me and me applying this to this situation. That's all I can do. I agree with you. Yes, especially now when accessory dwelling units are a huge thing.
Yes.
Right.
Homelessness and bringing elderly family members
Yeah,
back
absolutely.
home to be with the
Yes.
kids, and I agree, we've gotten away from that. Back in the 50s and 60s, that's the way every neighborhood had that. But I can only go with what is in front of me.
Right. You have a question?
But I think I could answer that myself, after looking at what I was told back then, and now looking at what I've built. I wouldn't want the size of garage that I wanted next to my house if I lived next door to that. In other words, I wouldn't want somebody to be able, I wouldn't want it worded to where somebody can take a 1,500 square foot house, square foot, I don't care about upstairs, square foot, and build a 5,000 square foot garage next door to it. Because now,
We're not asking for
That's not
that.
what we're trying to do, by no means.
okay, well,
Were you? You were gonna build a 5,000 square foot garage?
no, I was gonna build a 2,000 square foot.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I'm saying,
I'm completely
All right,
okay
all right,
with
we're off
keeping
the
that
bat.
50%
Let's-
footprint.
no, we're
I
not.
just like them
think
to be able to go up.
I'm sorry, but I'd like to clarify it, because I think we're on the same. I want to make sure that that's not what we're heading to, is that somebody would be able to build something.
No.
No, I like
Robin,
that. I
that's
think
not.
we're saying that
Okay.
50%'s good.
Okay.
But, 50, if your house is 2,000 square feet, build a 1,000-foot structure, but be able to go up to 2 stories and give it 2,000. I don't see that being,
Yeah,
you
we're
know,
not
50% of
blowing
the
up this way.
footprint.
I agree. I agree.
Just a rebuttal on it. The one property that I own, it's a 1,000 square foot house. It's a 1-story house, basic. I wouldn't want to see that little house, because I have the property, to have this 30-foot tall
Right,
building behind it.
right, that's what I'm saying.
And, if you put a 30-foot building here and a little house less and another 30-foot building in the back, it's, you kind of look like you've got, a hodgepodge.
Well, you can just go on Daytona Avenue and drive down the road here just a little way, this way, and you'll see exactly that. You'll see a 30-foot building and a little bitty old squat house, right? And you go to Snake's place, and, well, Snake doesn't own it anymore, and see the giant garage he built, and I'm thinking that's what happened, where this came from originally. Was, so,
Snake may have been a reason for a lot of things.
we can't go back in the past. But we have a motion to accept staff's interpretation with a recommendation to staff that they clear this language up. That's on the table right now.
Yes.
Is there any more discussion?
Can I say anything?
No, sir, you can't. We're beyond that part.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We have Randy to see if there's any, before we finish the motion, if there's any codes or anything that we're going to be, that we should think about as far as cleaning this up.
Well,
Can we do that afterwards? Or?
I think we turned that over to staff to clean it up.
Yeah.
Okay? All right, so that's the motion. We're ready to call the question.
Can I clarify what the motion is?
I'm
Yes,
going to do
please.
that in a second. I'm going to do that in a second,
Okay,
just
go
so
ahead.
I have it. Do we have a second? I didn't catch.
Yes, we have a
who
second. Dennis
seconded it.
seconded it.
Okay. And then just to clarify the motion, we're going to accept the interpretation as it sits now, that it cannot exceed, the detached garage structure, including apartment, cannot exceed 1,011.5 square feet,
That's correct.
with the intent for staff to amend and clarify.
With the recommendation. of
Okay.
Staff to clarify this language, clean this up,
Okay.
more clear. That's what,
Okay.
that's the question.
So Robin Hanger,
Yes.
Dennis Smith,
Yes.
Loretta Arthur,
No.
Tony Casada,
No.
Mike Meyer.
Yes. That's it, motion carries.
So to clarify cleaning up, what I think we maybe staff can look around to see what other jurisdictions do, just kind of get an idea, present you with surrounding jurisdictions, interpretations, what their rules are, and come back with a recommendation, and then it would be something that y'all can massage and come
Right.
up with a recommendation to the city commission.
That's exactly what we would like to see as a group.
Yeah, and we'll see what other surrounding communities do to make sure we're.
So he's not out.
No, he's out.
He's out. Okay.
But what he is doing may end up fitting in with what we end up amending.
Right, that's
So
true.
it's really more of a delay.
Right.
Potentially, as opposed to a no.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's a no at this moment, but it's,
you've accepted the staff's interpretation of the code as
Correct.
written.
Right.
But you've also asked staff to go back and clean it up and reevaluate the code and look at surrounding jurisdictions based on that interpretation of what cleanup.
exactly. Yes, that's exactly correct.
Okay.
All right, item number 6, ordinances. Can you read all of this to us, please?
I'm sorry?
It's only about 30 pages.
The next ordinance, isn't the nuisance ordinance, the next one?
Sure.
You want me to, okay. I'm gonna go ahead and take this one, if that's okay, Chairman?
Yes, that's fine, Mr.
Just because it's.
Read all of it, Scott?
Oh, let me find it now. Let's say I'm gonna take it and then. Maybe I should let Brian do that.
I got it here if you want.
Is this, what do you read normally?
Staff report.
Oh, I'm not gonna read your staff report.
I got the code.
No.
I got the ordinance.
You have the ordinance, but it doesn't need to be read by title technically. That's before the city commission. What this language is, we've had situations, and Brian could get into the detail about the one particular property, where we have problems when you have a piece of property that's homestead, and as y'all know, doing code enforcement on homesteaded property does not accomplish a lot sometimes, because we cannot go forward. Code enforcement does liens, and if the property owner doesn't correct, we accumulate fines and we put liens on the property, but we can't actually foreclose because it's homestead property. So the other avenues that we sometimes do, there's several of them. One is, if it's a high grass and weed situation, the special magistrate can order that authorize staff to go onto the property and mow it. And we'll put a lien on the property for the cost of mowing. And we also have a situation where if we have a structure that becomes a public nuisance, we have the ability to take that structure, take the property, because of the condition of the structure, we go through code enforcement, they still don't do anything, then we take it to the city commission, and they have the ability to declare it a public nuisance and then direct staff to go forward and demolish the structure, tear it down, and remove the public nuisance. What we really didn't have in our code is a situation that allows us to go through and the city commission can declare a public nuisance and order a major cleanup of property that goes beyond just mowing. That seemed to be a void that we had in our code. And the section, the nuisances that are listed in section 2661, you can see there's a long list of nuisances there.
Right.
And those listed nuisances would cover the property we have a particular issue with. And a lot of times people, for lack of a better word, they start operating a junkyard in their yard.
Right.
They just get debris and junk stored everywhere. And we saw that the language wasn't clear enough that we could go forward and enter that person's property, go through a process where we could enter that person's property and remove the stuff without actually going in there and demolishing their home that they live in. So we didn't want to do that. So what we're doing here is we've expanded the authority of the city commission. We're proposing to expand the authority of the city commission to, if there are violations of section 2661, which are titled special items declared a nuisance, that if they're not cleaned up, we got to go through code enforcement first. I think that's very important. You go through that due process step and see if the people will take the action. But if they're not responding to code enforcement, which most people do, but some don't, then we have the ability to go one step further and go to the commission and declare that the staff has the ability to go on and clear up those public nuisance and not just demolish the structure. Which was like an extreme situation. We can go on there and start removing debris, if they have junk and things like that. And we think it would be a very important tool that we would have. It just seemed to be a gap between code enforcement and going in with a bulldozer and tearing that whole thing down. There was a missing gap right there that this will allow us to do that. And so that's the amendment that's being proposed.
I see.
So.
That's what Chief Chitwood did down in Daytona with the meth houses.
Well, there's things in state law that will help you with meth houses that you can also use that will help there too.
Well, he destroyed Midtown. I mean, you go down there now and there's.
Yeah, but we're not talking really meth houses here. We're talking with a bunch of garbage and debris in the yard that people are more or less operating, recycle facility, whatever you want to call it. They just got a scrapyard. They just got a bunch of stuff out there, and and it affects the neighborhood. Obviously, there are issues when you start getting all that debris. You get rodents and snakes and other things in there, but we just didn't have a clear mechanism to go forward to remove it, and it will help us because in this one particular case, I don't know. Do y'all remember the articles that were in the paper about the junkyard guy in Seminole County? He had this huge junkyard in his property. He ended up going to jail over that whole thing. Well, the way they enforce that, there's a litter statute that it can actually be a felony if you have a certain volume of litter on their property. And that's one of the ways Seminole County was able to clean up his property. But they had the ability to go on the property, gather the material, and weigh it so they could prove criminally that they had that volume. So that's one of the issues we ran into. We're like, talking to the state attorney's office, well, how do we know we have that much volume, weight or volume of material there if we can't go in there and weigh it? And so this will give us the authority to go in, remove the debris, the items, weigh the items, we can, and if we want to pursue it further, we can. Because now we can say, tell the state attorney's office, yes, we accumulated this much debris, volume or weight of material from this person's property. Now, once we clean it up, we may not want to, because the goal here is not to punish people. The goal always is to clean up the property. We're not trying to collect money, that you can, if you're ever here for our code fine reductions, the city commission substantially reduces the fines down.
Right.
This isn't a profit center for us, and it's not to get people criminally prosecuted. The ultimate goal here is to obtain compliance. That's the purpose of code enforcement. This is another tool to help us do that. So this is a proposed amendment to the land development regulations. That's why it's coming before you.
Questions for Mr. Simpson?
Of course.
Yes,
yes. So what is the time, can you give us a timeline of what that, at the point that you would be going onto the property, can you give us a timeline as to what that would look like?
It could be a year or longer. I mean, because you start with a notice of violation to the property owner, say, look, you're in violation, please check the violation. They usually don't. If they don't, then you do a citation. Then it goes to the special magistrate. The special magistrate has to give them a reasonable time to comply. If they don't, then a fine starts accumulating. And usually those fines accumulate for a year or two, before we say, okay, we got to do something here. Now, some properties, we may look to foreclose the code fine. We do, Brian and I work on that sometimes together. But if you have homestead, that's not an option. So then, if we have a property, it's almost like we have to wait till this thing deteriorates to the point that the structure becomes a public nuisance, that it's a threat to the public's health, safety, and welfare. Well, that's a long time we got to wait till this structure starts falling in on itself, really in a bad shape. And we've done that a few times, but that's years in the making. So we're looking for something in between where somebody's structure is fine, but they're not cleaning up their property and maintaining. And we will go in and mow. Brian can probably answer that, how quickly we mow pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens quickly, but you're really not destroying someone's property when you mow because it's going to grow back. You're just mowing it and trimming it down. So here we're talking about going on and removing the debris, which is kind of filling the gap between not being able to do anything and tearing down the structure. Or typical code enforcement and tearing down a structure, it's a gap in between. So I would say you're probably looking at least 8 months to a year before it would ever reach that stage, I would think.
Thank you.
So, I mean, not saying that it would never happen. It would have to be an extreme situation, I think.
It could happen sooner. I mean,
Yeah.
if the place is just an absolute wreck, and they're operating a scrap yard and car parts and old appliances, and there's rats and vermin and that
All right, there's
that
one
type
vote.
of thing. There's one. Then we don't even have to issue a courtesy notice. We can go straight to a notice of violation, give them 30 days to clean it up. If they don't, we can schedule them for special master. Special master can give them another 30 days. The fines can start, within 60 days, we can have a lien on the property and then say, okay, after, 4 or 5 months, this is ridiculous. These people are thumbing their nose at the city. The neighbors are complaining. The neighborhood is not happy. And we can then move forward with then coming to the commission and asking them for permission to take further action.
What would happen is it would come before a public meeting at the commission. They would be noticed, and then they can come and talk to the commission. So, and it's already gone through the special matters, it's gone through code enforcement, it was gone through staff, code enforcement, and now we're at the commission saying, why aren't you cleaning up your property?
Okay.
Before we ever get to the point of actually doing anything.
So
Thank
it's
you.
better than it was,
Yeah, no,
but which was no action.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I just want to say, everything you said is, we have a law already on the books for that. You're talking about basically operating a junkyard. Okay, it's a residential area. We have restrictions on operating a business. So if they're bringing the scrap to their house,
Well, that was just an example.
breaking it down, but
Yeah.
we're all example, and they're breaking it down, and they're profiting from that breakdown. That is a business already. So I'm not one for redundant laws. Okay, so why don't we, instead of making another one, enforce the law we have on the books?
This is an enforcement mechanism. It's not a new law. We're not prohibiting anything new. It's an enforcement mechanism. Here's the logistics of somebody, of what you're talking about. Because Brian and I just talked about this. Somebody is running kind of a scrapyard out of their home. We can put fines on the property, they can accumulate, but we're not allowed to foreclose. Because it's homestead property. Can't foreclose on the property. Typically, what you'll see is when we get around to foreclosing property, we're not the first person putting a judgment on this property.
Correct.
There are other people ahead of us, and we just fall in line. This particular property we're looking at has 2 years of unpaid taxes. If that goes to a tax deed sale, our lien gets wiped out. So code enforcement may not work in that situation. Option 2 is, well, we can go to court and get an injunction. Well, the city's going to spend a lot of money going in court and get an injunction. Option 3 is we can try to pursue the littering statute, but we have the difficulties, we're trying to do that now. So what we're saying is, if we had the ability to bring that person, they've gone to the special magistrate, they're not complying, bring them to the commission to say, we're going to go in there and we're going to start removing these car parts and junk from your property. If you don't clean it up, then that's another enforcement mechanism. So it's not really a new law that we're saying, we're coming to go forward with it.
Who is making the judgment of the amount of whatever it may be on the property? You know, it just goes to, just say me, I like eccentric stuff. So I have all these eccentric items. Well, I get a new person move in next to me that is here every meeting that doesn't like that and calls it junk. And, you know, they're badgering. So now, who's going to make that determination?
There's several levels.
You know,
First
that
is
is
city staff. First, the complaint will come in, it will go to city staff.
Because
City
I-
staff will say, is what they have, do we think what they have is a violation of our city codes? If city staff thinks there's a code violation, then the notice process will be sent out, and it will go before the special magistrate. Then the special magistrate will ultimately make that decision as to whether or not there is a violation of the city code. If you don't, and then you can also always appeal a special magistrate's ruling to court. If we go the next step further and if this gets adopted and we decide that, look, this place is such a mess, we gotta go in there and clean it up, then it's gonna go before the city commission. And the property owner would be able to go into the city commission and say, this is why it's here, and this really shouldn't be considered junk or whatever. And maybe the city commission will say, if you convince the city commission, they'll say, you know, let's reword, just like what we did here. Let's rewrite our statute, our regulation. So there's multiple judgments that are made through this process. Starts with staff, then goes to special magistrate, then goes to the commission.
I just think we have laws already that pertain to that, vehicles, derelict vehicles. I have no idea the case you guys have referenced, you know what I mean? I know we have laws against derelict vehicles, untitled and all that, so I'm just trying to, you know.
We have
why
laws,
we're- You know what I mean?
but we don't have an enforcement mechanism.
So when somebody thumbs their nose at us,
Right,
what do we do?
but, okay, just my question to you is, we have a law that says no derelict vehicles are allowed there.
Right?
Okay, so say I have 20 of them. So you're telling me that if I tell you, so what? Fine, you can't come take the, so them cars off the
Well,
property?
in the staff report, it makes a distinction of those things. So
No, I'm
when
asking
you
about-
go
you
through,
said we have laws, but we can't enforce
well, and
them.
I'm going to explain that. When you go through, in the staff report, it lists certain things. Some of them are vehicles. We very specifically have the right to go in and remove vehicles from the property.
But I'm saying right now, with the
Right.
statute that you have
Right.
no way to come in and remove that vehicle
We can
right
remove
now.
vehicles and tear down structures.
Right.
But say.
If you have trash,
Car parts, say you have
Right.
hoods, say you have other forms of what I may think is junk stacked up. But you have things in your yard that are not automobiles or a public nuisance structure, that's where our void is. Where somebody just has an accumulation of trash, junk, whatever. How do we enforce that? And this will give us that mechanism.
We are not allowed to go on there and start removing trash.
So, when I read this, it talked mostly about hazard and weeds. I don't remember really reading about, like eccentric, I've seen some yards where they have,
It actually refers,
so I didn't see
Later
that.
down the road, it could turn, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
well, it actually refers to,
right.
it
So,
refers to the items listed in 2161, I think.
Right.
And so those are the things that we're talking about. So, I mean, I can.
That was an attachment
From,
in there.
coming from up north, we had a lot of people move from the city there. Next thing you know, you're telling me I can't have my chickens or my horses on there, and I don't like the manure smell. Well, this has been a farm for 100 years, and because you came down, the racetrack is gone because they didn't like the noise. They built animal preserve was there for 70 years. The development that the people moved into was called Tiger Preserve. Well, they didn't figure it out, wow, these tigers roar all night long. Now the Tiger Preserve is gone. And I'm just afraid of, this is where we're moving to. That you're gonna get a group that's gonna come in, a new wave that's gonna come in and says, well, I don't like this, I don't like this, and then they're gonna be able to interpret this law that we're making, and it's gonna put a burden on the people that have been here all their life.
Well, the laws can
That
always be
hasn't had a
changed.
problem.
We can always change the laws if something gets interpreted, but section 2161, this is the things that we're talking about. I'm just going to read through them. There's
And that
16.
section was an attachment
Yeah.
in the staff report.
And this has been in here since 1984. You saw that? So all those things. So you're talking about things that, sanitary nuisances, accumulation of trash, litter, debris, garbage, bottles, paper, cans, dead, decayed fish, fowl, those type of things. Weeds that exceed, 12 inches in height, and things that harbor rat, snakes, and other vermin. Structures that are in a dilapidated condition that are unfit for human habitation, unauthorized and unnecessary noise and annoying vibrations, odors, something that create obnoxious odors, carcasses of animals, public wells or cisterns, or canals, bodies of by sewage, dead animals, crematory waste. I mean, there's this. It's intended to really address public nuisances.
I understand what
Yeah, tended to address.
I'm looking at the other side of,
But before we get to it, the code, the way it's written, we have to go through code enforcement first. So there is a code enforcement process first, which there's due process to defend, to say that this isn't a violation. And public nuisance in the law has a bit of interpretation. It's not a clear interpretation, but there's a difference between a public nuisance and a private nuisance. A public nuisance is what we can regulate, which is something that impacts a large number of people. A private nuisance is something that really just affects the adjoining property owner or very few people adjoining. Now, I can't say that there's this, it's got to be 10% of the population, there's no fixed rule like that. But if we have, and I've done it before, people have come in and they complain about a neighbor, and we say, well, they're not violating our code, and if it's annoying you so much, then that's an issue between the two of you. It's a private issue. We don't get involved. If somebody is doing something that's annoying a whole neighborhood, i.e., you brought up horse. Remember our horse? Right? That issue. Well, that was getting into a violation of,
I brought it up, the horse, as if it was a farm already.
Right, it was a
you
long
know
time
what I
farm.
mean?
And we have there is a right to farm law in Florida that you're allowed to keep.
But I'm just saying, you move in now, pile of manure, it's
Yeah.
been there for 100 years. Well, that could fit into every one of them things. It could
Yeah.
harbor varmints and all that. Hey, yes, I'm containing them as far as my thing, keep them without farm, but you don't like it, and you can, interpret it that, well, that's a varmint.
Well, I mean, do we have a large manure farm here? I'm just curious.
Not anymore.
Okay. How
We're
about,
not, let me tell you the things that we deal with, that I deal with in terms of what we're talking about. And I'm from up north as well, so I know what you're talking about. And
That's all I'm trying to-
those things are different, because when you have a farm, It's zoned for that. It's zoned that there's going to be manure and those types of things. A lot of the things that we deal with things where there are, as it states in here, animal carcasses, there are large rats that are coming from one property and running onto the other property because of the things that are the things that are there on the property that harbor the rats and that harbor the snakes and conditions that make those things very common. We're not talking about anything that anybody could construe as being works of art. So, and there's layers. So to some extent, I mean, when you look at code enforcement looks at what's going on there. And our complaints typically come from the neighbors. These are not things that we go out and on our own decide, okay, so the neighbors look at these things, they say there's dead animals, there's rats, it stinks, there's trash. We've had cases of people, defecate and urinate in pails and put it outside. There's nobody that's going to confuse that for a work of art. It's clear that these are things that have to be dealt with. Right now, there's nothing we can do about that. Our hands are tied. So what this is saying is that if staff looks at those things and says, okay, yes, there's dead animals, there's feces, there's rats, there's these types of things, then the special master looks at it. She looks at it, she makes a determination as to whether or not she agrees with us. The person who lives there is invited to attend that meeting. Then, if still nothing is done, it goes to the next level, which would be the city commission. The city commission would look at it and say, okay, are these things works of art? Or are these things truly a danger to the neighbors and what those around? And then they would make that final determination. But I see your point in terms of a slippery slope and people interpreting, but we're talking about things that.
My opinion, everything that you mentioned, the health department should be able to handle it.
They should be, right, but should and what happens and the way real life works, totally different.
Yeah, we talked to the health department and the Humane Society, everybody to come out and help us with that horse issue.
Right.
Didn't help us.
Didn't help us.
So,
So, but it should, but we have to deal with the cases where it doesn't work. There's a lot of things that should happen a certain way,
Yeah.
but they just don't.
and when you get right down to trying to enforce, you're like, all right, we're gonna go on a private property and remove this without providing due process of law. And we're like, well, that's not a good idea, so where's the due process of law? And that's what we're trying to create, the notice and opportunity to be heard before we do anything. And so it's either we do it administratively through the commission, or we have to go to court, which costs the city a lot more money. So, and the things that you're talking about where people move to, like, for instance, if somebody moved next to the pickleball courts, and all of a sudden they didn't like the lights, that's coming to the nuisance. When you move to the nuisance, the common example is, you don't move next to an airport.
Understandable, but,
Yeah. But there's defenses to it. I mean,
there was a
there's.
case that was brought up that here, that they moved to a situation. And to get a variance, well, no, that, since, was there, so it does happen.
Dennis, we're going to move on.
Yes.
Your question has been answered multiple times.
That's fine. No, it's a good discussion. It's a good discussion.
Perfectly fine.
Okay. So I would entertain a motion to approve the enforcement ordinance as is written, recommended to the commission. Do I have the motion?
I'll make a motion.
Wait a minute.
Oh, wait,
Oh, yes.
no, come on, Ms. Hyde. If you talk about horse manure, though, I'm gonna make you sit down.
I'll dance.
Tell us who you are and where you're from.
I am Heidi Heller, 460 Ridgewood Avenue in the future excellent city of Holly Hill. This is regarding section 6.1.c.c, the special items declared a nuisance, just what we were talking about. I'm really glad that we had this extensive discussion to illuminate more definitions, what's covered and what's not covered. I do see this now that it's 1984, so some of these things, I don't know if we could change now, or I'd like to recommend that we change. The number one was your weeds. Florida-friendly plants is a statewide program controlled by the state of Florida IFAS. So that's not mentioned there, and it sort of wipes out native plants that actually grow over 12 inches. So that needs to be modified to exempt Florida-friendly plants. Number 5, all unnecessary or unauthorized noises and annoying vibrations, including animal noises. Well, you could say I'm an annoying noise up here. A bicycle, motorcycle, plane is annoying, so I think that needs to be defined a little bit more better, if that's or better. The carcasses of animals or fowl not disposed of within a reasonable time after death. That needs to be defined, I do believe, a reasonable time for someone who eats roadkill and someone who does not eat roadkill. So a reasonable time needs to be, I would like to see defined better, like Mr. Simpson said. And then you have number 8, industrial wastes or other substances. Can those substances be defined? Because they are very loose in all the definition of the words or interpretations or intent of the words. And number 10, any accumulation of stagnant water. Well, sometimes the retention ponds in the city, actually the city maintain retention ponds, become stagnant. Does it include that, or is there some exceptions to that? So I would like to see some of these parameters, just like the other law that you were working on, want defined more clearly. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Okay. Now, I would entertain a motion to make the recommendation to the commission to adopt this enforcement.
I make a motion that we adopt the ordinance as it's presented to us, and have Brian define it as the way it needs to be, so yes.
Okay. Do I have a second? So there's no second. So the motion is going to die for lack of a second?
Okay.
I'll second.
All right, thank you. So now I have a motion and a second. So is there more discussion?
We're going to vote on it?
Well, we'll have discussion first.
Oh, no, I'm fine.
So you don't want to discuss it, all right?
I just have one question on that.
Please.
So we're talking about defining all of this. To me, when I read it, it looks like it's something just hazardous and that is really a nuisance. And it is difficult to define, I think, every potential. So I guess my question is it a nuisance on how many interpretations before it goes to the commission? So would it be,
That's something staff is going to have to look at this and see if there really does need to be definitions and
On this
clarification.
2661, like Ms. Heidi was speaking?
Yeah, I mean, if we start doing that with everything, it would never end in
Right.
terms of
I agree.
updating the code and adding to it. So that's something we'll look at a later time, but staff is not prepared to do that now.
so can you tell me how many interpretations of a nuisance? So it wouldn't just be one person's interpretation, it would be multiple interpretations? And then the commission would all have to agree that it's a.
Yes.
So yeah, so it's, I'm comfortable with it. I'm comfortable.
So you're looking at a minimum of whichever staff is involved, and to go to code enforcement. And before it ever goes to the city commission, the city manager would have to agree.
Okay. So something like
Probably the
native
city attorney would have
plants.
to agree.
Yeah.
Then it goes to the commission, because before we do, just so you know, before we bring something to the commission, before we do any type of demolition type thing, we usually do a lien search to make sure we notice all the creditors that are on the property that we may, especially if we're going to tear down a structure.
Right.
We're going to be tearing down a structure. So that's your collateral on your loan.
Right, yeah,
You
so you
know
can-
about it. So we do a lot before we get to that point of bringing it
Process.
there. So this whole thing creates, what it does is it creates a mechanism or a tool in our toolbox to help really address, and it probably will not be utilized very often, in my opinion, just based on the cases I've seen. Brian can probably have a better, judge of that. But, there's not been that many cases brought to my attention that we're trying to foreclose or deal with. But
1 in 5 years.
yeah, so 1 in 5 years. So it's going to be very rarely used, hopefully, that people don't get their property to this condition where we want to take this step. Because going on someone's property is something you really don't want to do. I always tell them, do not, that's only an extreme measure, and let's make sure we satisfy all potential due process issues. So it creates a tool, but there are numerous steps along the way for, one, the person to remedy the violation, and two, for them to have the opportunity to argue that it is not a violation. So there's numerous steps along the way, and we're talking somebody who is thumbing their nose at the city at a minimum. Sometimes these people may have issues, mental health issues. They're like hoarders or whatever. They may have some issues there that they need some help with. And so it will not be abused, I can assure you that. And if it does, y'all and the commission can always rein it in. These rules can always be changed. So.
Or they just tell us, we're not doing it. Do whatever you want. We're not doing it.
Yeah, the commission has to agree to
Yeah.
to act on it anyway, so.
Tell us that, yeah.
There's a lot of, so, thank you.
I have a quick question that has to do with this in a way. How does this affect the properties and the waterways that the city is in charge of? I mean, there's a gate that's torn off of the city yard down there that's a danger. It's hanging over the sidewalk. Every canal in this city has shopping carts in it, tires in it, and standing water that's stagnated, it stinks,
Canal belongs to the county,
okay? But
Yeah,
not all of them.
not all of them, but the one that has the shopping carts is the one you're on LPGA.
No.
From the shopping mart, that's the one that has the shopping carts in it. belongs to the county.
No, I would say there was one around 10th Street or that runs north and south too. And yeah, we're told that it belongs to the railroad or whatever, but it's still in our city. And I know we're looking to address it, but
Code enforce the county.
it's really hard to tell
You know
somebody,
that.
but it's really hard to tell somebody they got to clean up something when we don't clean ourselves up first.
I've code enforced the city,
Yeah.
and I have code enforced the county, which Dennis well knows. He was involved in 2 parking lot issues.
Okay.
So when these things are brought to our attention, they do get.
I mean, there's water that don't move in half of them,
Right.
and it stinks.
Yeah.
But, okay.
Mosquitoes.
All right.
Point well taken, and
Well, I think part of code enforcement is there's a remedy. There's something that you can do to fix this issue. That's all,
And there's something we can do to fix these.
well, I'm just saying, but
But
you gotta have
our hands are
way
tied.
to do it, and
So will us doing this, will that help in that case?
No, because the city can go on their property already. It's their property, so they can go on city property and clean it up. So this isn't addressing that at all.
But can they go on the county for not doing anything? Can they go on the
This could
the
help with that.
state for not doing anything? Okay,
Yeah.
then I'm all for it.
More questions? Call the question, please, Ms. Lanning.
Robin Hanger,
Yes.
Loretta Arthur,
Yes.
Dennis Smith. No. Tony Casada,
Yes.
Mike Meyer.
Yes. Motion carried. All right. On my agenda.
It's my thing.
Okay, ordinances, check. Old business. There's something that I want to bring up. Our staff has their hands tied when it comes to variances and small things. People bring their stuff in and they miss their setback by a tenth of a foot or something like that, they end up having to come get a variance instead of staff having a 10% write-off. Almost every other jurisdiction has that ability to do that. Holly Hill does not. And it is a huge waste of time and manpower and money. And I really think that this board should make a recommendation to the city commission that they empower the staff with the ability to write off these things up to some reasonable amount. 10%, I think, is usually the standard answer. And give them that ability. Because otherwise, we end up spinning our wheels so often when we don't need to be.
Is it still subject to the same terms, same conditions of a variance? You still have to meet those same elements.
Right. Everything, and there's a fee, because for administrative write-off, I think they don't charge us $150 or something like that. There's a fee for it, but it's at least, so it says, okay, that way we're not encouraging people to miss it by an inch or 2 or 3 inches, right? Because it's costing them money, right? But to have to go through a whole variance process for such a small amount when we're not going to do anything except give them the variance. We're not going to make them tear the building down or take the wall down, right? We may make them move a fence sometime, but.
Wait, that's along the same lines as, if you remember, we had the variance for somebody who needed the wheelchair access because their son was disabled. And Brian and I talked, on something like that, they shouldn't have to come through this process when they meet it. So it could be tied into that same type of.
Yeah.
We discussed that, so.
Robin, would you work on that? Brian, I'm sorry, right now, my head is seeing Georgia running the football.
I know, so would you hurry up?
I'm trying, it ain't me.
Just say
You asked
Georgia's up
25
7.
questions. Ryan, would you work something up and bring that to us so that we can have a look at it and see if we can?
Yes, it is on my list to, one of the things that we are looking at is the ability for staff to make a decision with regard to folks who need a wheelchair ramp, as we had discussed previously. So I think it's good that we can incorporate something like this as well. And, but yes, I will work on that and bring it to this board.
Okay, I appreciate that. If that's okay with y'all, then I asked Brian to do that. I hope that's okay. All right, there's no more questions, no more talk.
Wait.
Let's go watch football. Anybody, all in favor?
Wait.
Wait, what?
Staff comments?
Yes.
Can't have any. I'm sorry. It's 8 o'clock. Yes, please.
Just if it pleases the board to let Eleni make a presentation.
This is the proposed meeting schedule for the year.
Oh, right. I'm sorry, Eleni. I forgot that was there.
My item.
Darn it.
The only major date differences in here are obviously the 4th of July week. We won't be meeting that Monday, so we moved it to the 2nd. And then in the month of September is when we have the Volusia County School Board meets, so the commission changes their meeting, so we have to change ours, so that's.
Okay, so it's fine, let's go.
Okay. Tuesdays are never any good for me.
Georgia's
So-
gonna get their ass kicked, so.
I don't think so.
You're crazy. Shall we have a friendly wager?
Looks good.
About a Duke
Yes,
Brown
it's-
Ale at
It's on the
Fletcher?
agenda, so you can also see it there, but I will also email it.
Tuesdays don't work for me. I'd like to work on that date further down the road, please.
Okay,
Okay?
Yeah.
that's the date moved due to the Volusia County School Board.
Right, yes, ma'am, I
Okay.
understand. But just Tuesdays are no good for me.
You're good with everything else, Chair?
Everything else is
Okay, so that particular one, as we get close, we can come
right.
the one before.
Okay, everybody else good? All right. Have a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Our motion to adjourn.
All right. Second?
Second.
There is no discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Go Georgia. Go Dog.
Nice meeting, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your
Bye.
vote of confidence. I appreciate it very much.
So this